Okay. So this is a 1.5-hour workshop on parts work. It's going to be fairly interactive from an experiential perspective. There'll be an opportunity for you to think a little bit more about yourself and the different parts that make up who you are. The first quote that we're going to start with is by Rumi, where it says, "Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there." So this is one of my favourite quotes, and it really encompasses all of what this model called parts work is all about. It's a no blame model. It's not about blaming ourselves in any way or blaming other people. There can be a real tendency in life, and it's one of the defence mechanisms, to project out onto others. And if there's things that we don't like, we can tend to judge and criticise, where actually often we're holding a mirror up. There's aspects of ourselves that we judge and criticise. It might be different. But this model's all about no blame. It's just about taking back responsibility and showing compassion to the self. And when we can show compassion to our own self, we're more likely to be able to extend it to others. So this parts work model is based on the work of Hal and Sidra Stone, as shown here in the picture on the left. They are psychologists, psychotherapists that were bringing this work back in the 1970s. Now, when we actually see the theory of psychology of cells, which is the model that they created, their way of working with this is called voice dialogue, where the therapist would ask the client to move their chair to different parts of the room to talk to these different parts of themselves. So it's been likened to therapies like Gestalt therapy, transactional analysis, all sorts of different ones. But actually, when we dig down, Hal Stone is a Jungian psychologist. So he's really derived his ideas from archetypes and those primitive parts of us that are in what he calls the collective unconscious. So really what he's saying is that we have these infinite ways of being in the world. We have these infinite energies, that what happens is these energies come up through the collective unconscious into our unconscious, and they manifest quite personally. So we see them as being our personality. Sidra Stone is a psychologist with CBT roots. I realised I spelled that wrong. So Skinner did the experiment with rats, where they hit a little pedal and a pellet would come out. And so they realised that as they repeated that, they'd keep getting the reward. So it's all about action and reward. And what they said was, when we behave in a certain way and that behaviour gets rewarded, we then do that behaviour more. We keep it going. These are 3 books of theirs: Embracing Ourselves, Embracing Your Inner Critic, and Partnering a New Kind of Relationship. So their initial book that they wrote was Embracing Ourselves. It's a really excellent book, and it talks all about the parts, and you can see them in practice having conversations with these different parts of people. Embracing the Inner Critic is just all about the inner critic, and the inner critic usually causes a lot of havoc in people's life and a lot of upset, and can shave away at people's self-esteem. So the book is all about the inner critic. And then Partnering a New Kind of Relationship is about bringing these ideas into our relationship so we can grow and develop within our relationships.
Inka.
I'm just going to ask yourself just to pop yourself on mute if you haven't already. Go down and do this. That's it. Okay. So I'm going to play this little video which just introduces us to this method of voice dialogue. So I'm just going to go past the first minute where it's just intros.
As our first metaphor.
Let me know if you can't.
Within this landscape is a large, multifaceted diamond. The personality can be imagined to be like this diamond. It is one function with many sides or parts. Imagine that the facets of the diamond are made up of thousands of different sets of eyes. The eye on this facet would see the world in a particular way. The eye on the facet next to it would see the world in almost the same way, with perhaps a 5% difference. The facet next to that one would see a 10% difference, and so on. Each eye, that is, each aspect of the personality, would have a different view of the world. Each part of the personality is an individual structure in itself, just like the facets on the diamond. We all behave differently in different situations. For instance, the way you behave towards your parents is different to the way you behave towards your own children. The way you behave on the sporting field is different to the way you behave when making love. The way you behave when you're angry is different to the way you behave when you're sad. Each of these behaviors and characteristics is encapsulated into an individual structure called a sub-personality. Another way of looking at the personality from the point of view of voice dialogue is to examine a CD music player into which you can load more than one CD at a time. Each CD is pre-recorded with particular tracks of music. It can only play back what is recorded on it. It cannot play anything else. Whichever CD you choose, the player can only play that one. It cannot play any of the others until they are chosen. It is locked into only those tracks which are embedded on its surface. There is a huge variety of sub-personalities, perhaps hundreds, each independent in itself and driving your life's experiences. Each sub-personality behaves in the ways it has been programmed to behave, just like the music CD. Let's see now how your personality builds up and how you've become the person that you are, because you are far more than you ever imagined yourself to be. When you are born, you are totally vulnerable. You can do nothing for yourself. You can't wash yourself, feed yourself, dress yourself, nor walk, talk, or make yourself understood. You are totally dependent on your mother and those who care for you. We are all born into the world in this way. This is the first identity we have as a vulnerable child. As we grow, we experiment with certain behaviors. These are called the child series of subpersonalities. They involve a whole range of emotions and modes of expression, from fury to bliss, from love to terror, from joy to boredom, from manipulation to seduction. We try everything we can in our efforts to get what we want. It is a natural part of growing up. Some of these behaviors are kept and others are discarded, or more accurately, buried, sometimes deeply, into the subconscious mind. In the psyche live the various structures called subpersonalities. There are perhaps hundreds of these, and each has a particular function. The word persona, the origin of the word personality, means mask, and we all have a variety of masks to wear that come forward to be used at different times in our lives. Some people believe that they are one single personality structure, but, as you will see, this is a misunderstanding. We are all made up of many subpersonalities, many selves. Each subpersonality is also a totally discrete structure in itself, like the CD or single computer program. It is loaded up by the inputs coming through the senses, being programmed as the person grows. Each one has its own memories, history, agendas, desires, feelings, physical components, ideas and needs. Here are some of the more familiar ones used by most people in today's developed society. One of the first to develop is often the pleaser, a part that pleases other people. It is a subpersonality which children use as it makes them feel very secure when they are appreciated and loved. Then along may come an inner critic, that voice you hear in your head telling you off and criticizing you and reminding you of things you have done in the past which have embarrassed you. This is often associated with the rule maker, the one which keeps the rules of your family, society, culture, or religion. This is sometimes called the conscience. The rational mind or analyst also make an appearance. They may be followed by a clown, a part that is full of fun and the life and soul of a party. Perhaps a rebel appears in reaction to a person being suppressed by their outer circumstances. Then, particularly in today's high-activity world, a pusher is born to keep the person on the go and achieve. In opposition to these doers is the being energy subpersonality, which is content and happy in the present, and through which intimacy is often experienced. Our instinctual nature is usually buried deeply and can only make an appearance in our dream world. Others, such as vanity, sadness, anger, fear, concern, and more, can live within us. So, for instance, the rational mind subpersonality is not able to experience feelings of joy. It can analyze what they may be like, it can consider joy as a concept, but it can't feel joy. That's not its job. It does words and concepts, not feelings and emotions. As you will later see, this is often a primary reason why people do not understand each other and their relationships fall apart.
Okay, so we'll just pause that there. So what he is saying is how each of these parts that make up who we are all carry different elements to them. So whereas we usually think that there's just like one aspect of our personality, this model is saying that actually that's not quite true. There's actually many multiple personalities that lie within us. This is different to what we might have known in the past as multiple personality disorder or split personality. It's not that. This is a very normal part of development, that we have these different parts that come out. And in the counselling and psychotherapy world now, part work is a really, really popular theory that underpins many therapists' work. I just ask you all to mute yourselves. I think there's somebody not on mute there, just so we can prevent any feedback. Now, what can then happen is that these parts come into conflict with each other, and this is where it can become really, really difficult to make decisions, because we might have a decision to be made, say it's around going to college and learning something. The part of us that really wants to learn, you know, the learner, will be really, really motivated, and we'll see that as a really good opportunity to grow and develop as a person, maybe to further careers or whatever that might be. So that part of us would just see the world through that lens. It'd see that making that choice is all about growth and development and career progression and whatever other reasons. That part will have its own belief system, its own outlook on the world, its own body language. You know, these different parts have us wearing different clothes at times, and a different kind of language that it might use. It might just be a different way in the world. I always find it quite interesting because I run a lot of counselling courses, so I teach adults over long periods of time, and it is quite interesting how adults can really go back into that real sort of student way of being, that real kind of learning. So there's that kind of exciting part of learning, but also being a student and, you know, having others, you know, give that information in. And it's quite interesting. And I found myself doing the same when I've been a student on a course, where I go into real student mode, which is very different to when I'm working. I'm a lot more doing mode and I'm giving out. Whereas when we're learning, it's a lot more receiving. So that part might come into conflict with the worrying part around time and finances, and that might worry about other things that, yeah, if I go and do another college course, will we be able to afford it? Is it really going to get us to where we want it to go? So then we've got these two parts in conflict all of a sudden. And the work of voice dialogue is to get to know these parts and then to enter into a conversation with them, so we can find out a little bit more. Because the essence with parts work is that they all have a gift for us. So even the parts that we might not like very much, or we might think cause us a bit of trouble, they all have a gift. They all have a message for us. And when we can turn towards them and listen to that message, they can usually relax back a little bit. And once they feel heard, then they don't need to shout quite so loudly in our lives. So this is the primary self system. So Carl Jung talked about the concept of the persona. So the persona is this archetype that's a mask that we put onto the world. So the persona is also known as the actor's mask, and it's how we want to be perceived by the world, but it's also a way of concealing aspects of the self. It's a collection of sub-personalities. So how Helen Sidra Stone moved this thought on, that the persona isn't just one entity, it's a collection of sub-personalities or parts. We can use that term interchangeably. So they're a collection of sub-personalities that we identify with. So they're not necessarily what we might put in a positive camp, but we identify with it. We call those personalities me. So for example, I might have a pleasing part that makes up my persona, a perfectionist, for example, a pusher that really drives me forward in life. I might have a worrying part of my personality. I might have a part that's quite abrupt with people, just very blunt, just says it how it is. It might get me in a bit of trouble, but that might be part of my persona. So if somebody asked me to describe myself, these might be the kind of things I might say. I might say, yeah, I really like to do a good job. That'd be my perfectionist. I'm a real hard worker. That'd be my pusher. I'm really good at working as part of the team and I can really fit in. That might be my pleaser coming out. So when we're describing ourselves to others, we're usually naming these parts that come out. And then these parts come out more strongly in different times of our life. So, for example, within the family system, for example, maybe my worrier part might come out, or my blunt part might come out. Then in the workplace, maybe it's my people pleaser and perfectionist and pusher, the part that drives me forward. So they drive our psychological car at any one time. You know, we've always got one self that's just driving that car. And when we aren't aware of that, and when we allow it to drive our car for probably a bit too long, that's when it can cause trouble in our lives. Because if you can imagine, if I've got a part of me that's the pusher, that's just pushes me forward, that's a very common part in Western society as well. If I'm not aware of that part that just keeps driving me forward, it's going to eventually lead towards burnout. And it means that other parts, maybe joy, maybe the being part, you know, other parts of me, the creativity, don't then get so much of a look in, because the pusher just would be driving me forward. So when we can become aware of which part of this is driving our psychological car at any one time, that awareness gives us choice. So the development of our primary self system is very much influenced by the culture in which we live, or will be brought up in, and the society in which we live. So for example, Western cultures really identify with mind, that the intellect, the mind, and there's less emphasis on feelings and having those real kind of heart-to-heart feeling kind of conversations. So there's more of an influence. So whilst that's really generalizing, and that doesn't mean to say that everybody's going to have a mind as a primary self, but it might mean that that gets a lot more approval in the world. So if you're intellectual, if you're academic, then that can carry more weight than somebody that's more feeling-based, more expressive. We can hear sometimes sort of negative words being said about somebody that might be very in touch with their feelings. Whereas actually that's a great thing, to be in touch with your feelings. But it's also a good thing to be able to be in touch with your mind as well, and have both parts playing out. And some Eastern cultures identify with being a bit more. They're able to be in the world, and spirituality. So we can see that the birth of these primary selves are really influenced by the world that we live in and our family system as well. And to clarify, they develop to protect our vulnerability. So as we come into the world as the vulnerable child, as you just saw, these parts come in to protect that vulnerability. And often these parts are quite scared if they don't do their job, all hell will break loose or things will just fall apart. So they're usually doing their job for a very good reason. So the first part to develop is usually the pleaser. So if you can imagine a baby laying in their cot and their parents are kind of cooing over them and they smile, and something in the baby in that moment recognizes that that smile was seen by the parents, and noticing the expression on the parents' face, maybe the lighting up of the eyes. When the baby does something that displeases the parent, or the parent might disapprove of or be upset by, something within the baby recognizes that within the parent. So what happens as one primary cell gets developed, for example, the pleaser, its equal and opposite goes into the shadows and is disowned. And Carl Jung very much worked on this notion of opposites. So where we've got one part of us that might be quite developed, its equal and opposite will go into the shadows. So for example, if we've got quite a hard-working, pushing part, our inner laziness or inner being part is likely to be disowned, and we don't let ourselves do that very often. And then it comes with judgment. We either criticize ourselves. If we find ourselves, sitting having a cup of tea, we might just be looking at all the jobs that need doing or feeling guilty for doing that. Or we might find ourselves judging other people for being lazy. We'll find ourselves having big judgment calls. What I like about this model is that there's this concept that where there's one finger pointing out, there's three fingers pointing back. So when we find ourselves judging another person, that's a really good opportunity to pause and to ask the question of what are they mirroring back to me? What part of me that I probably don't like or don't let be very often, what are they mirroring back? How are they showing me how to be a little bit more? So that might be, they might be, if we find ourselves judging someone's anger, maybe they're really showing you how to protect yourself and protect your boundaries. If we find ourselves judging another person for being lazy, maybe they're showing us how to just meet our own needs for once. So where those judgments come, it's highlighting a part of ourselves that we've pushed away. So there are a number of cells that develop to gain approval and to keep parents happy. So it's usually about surviving the family system. And when we can please and get that approval from our parents, and we have that sense of belonging, we're safe. And that pleasing just keeps the rules of the family going. If we please and follow the rules, then we don't need to change. Because often what parents will do is they'll bring their children up in the light of their own primary selves. So if we've got parents that are really just hard workers and high achievers, they're very likely to approve that behaviour in their children. And then that will develop that part of the child's persona. So I'm going to show you now. First of all, before I show you, let's open up the chat and have a little bit of interaction. So if you just go down to the bottom of your screen, click on the chat. From what I've been saying so far, what parts are you recognising in yourself? Maybe some primary parts that you're recognising that drive your psychological car at times. So we've had things like the pusher, the pleaser, the perfectionist, the hard worker, the sensible one, the responsible one, the creative one, the laid back one. Got some pleasers. Glad I'm not the only one there. People pleaser at work. Yeah. Pleaser. Yeah, it's a really dominant one, the pleaser, because it enables us to belong to groups. Pleaser and hard worker. Isn't it frustrating to want to please everyone? Yes, we'll go on to that in a moment, actually. Critical, yeah, so an inner critic there. Perfectionist. Just going to scroll up, so I've missed a little flurry of messages there. Yeah. So rebel, pusher, pleaser. Yeah, lots of pleasers. Yeah, so what can then happen when we over-identify the part of ourselves, or it's really has it, we, you know, that behavior and reward has meant that it's really, really kept us safe. What can happen then, as it's equal and opposite goes into the shadows, that will look different for different people. So that usually looks like anger. You know, if we're pleasing, we're disowning maybe the anger part of us, the confrontation part of us, maybe the opinionated part of us. It will be quite slightly different for everybody. And that then gets disowned and pushed into the shadows. What this work helps us to do is to bring that one out of the shadows, so we can then have a bit of balance, because it's about choosing, because sometimes it's good to please others and sometimes it's the right thing to do in certain situations, but we also need to be able to have access to the part that can look after us and protect our boundaries and please ourselves in a way rather than others. Perfectionist, the clown. Yeah, excellent. I'm going to show a little clip now of Hal and Sidra Stone talking to a group of people in a workshop, and they're talking about the pusher. I'm just going to, just bear with me one moment. I just need to bring this up. I might need somebody to let me know if this doesn't play properly in a moment. I'll let you know when I'm about to play it. It should be fine, but if somebody could let me know if it doesn't. Okay, I'm just going to forward it on. Okay, so we've got Hal Stone talking about the pusher. So yeah, if you can let me know now if you can't hear it.
Anybody here have a pusher? How many pushers do we have here? Active pushers. That's all?
That's all.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Maybe the ones here make up for those who don't have a pusher.
Yeah.
This is obviously not the United States, that's for sure. The United States, in an audience like this, 99.99999% of the people would have a pusher in the primary self.
The pusher is very, very popular in the States, where we're getting faster and faster and faster. We have to do more. You're not satisfied with just doing something human, but you're moving and moving, and everything has to be on schedule and performed absolutely quickly and done. So the pusher as a primary self is one that never lets you rest. Never lets you rest. Its favorite line is something like, well, as soon as you get this done, you'll feel better. Or just do this one more thing. So you might become a pusher as a primary self.
And these will actually overpower you?
They literally overpower you. So if your primary self is a pusher, you can't relax. You'll be uncomfortable when you have nothing to do.
Could you explain the pusher a bit more?
The pusher energy is very important. We'll say a little
Very
more about it,
important.
okay? Do you want to talk about it a little bit, or you want me to?
Sure.
We both had extraordinary pushers, so we're experts on the pusher.
They don't stop. They're the selves that say life is short, and I got to get this done. I got to get this done. Just one more thing, and they have these incredible drives to achieve and not to waste a minute. They can't stand empty spaces in your appointment book. They can't stand any waste of anything.
Excuse me. Now you've said that, now ask people how many pushers they are, because I don't understand what
Okay, how many pushers do we have? Okay.
Oh, I feel better.
I like it.
I was worried. Thank you.
You know, we have this thing about language. We think we speak the same language.
But wait, let's finish this first, and then we'll come.
So at any rate, they're very common in our current civilization. It's speeding up faster and faster and faster. And the pushers of the world have gotten stronger and stronger. And their idea is, if you stop for a minute, you're going to lose the game of life. And there's this whole new group of pushers that are into consciousness. There are pushers who are into transformation. There are pushers who are into enlightenment. And there's this constant, if we don't get it, and we don't get it now or soon, we're going to lose.
I had a businessman that came to me once many years ago who had a extraordinarily large business in Southern California, and he wanted to sell it and move to Aspen, which is a ski resort in Colorado. And his wife said, look, before you sell the business, would you see Halstone? And, you know, I'm a little worried about this. So he came to see me, and I asked him, I said, well, you know, why do you want to sell? Well, I want leisure, I want more rest, I don't like running this big business. So I did some voice dialogue with him, and first of all, I talked to his pusher that was running his business, and the pusher was just extraordinary. He worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, he never stopped. So I asked the pusher, I said, how do you feel about his moving to Aspen? And the pusher said, I don't mind. I said, you don't mind that he's giving up this huge business that you've been running for the last 7 years? You don't mind? Oh, he said, not at all. When he moves to Aspen, I'll have him on the ski slope at 6 o'clock in the morning every day. And in 6 months, he'll be the best skier in Aspen. The pusher doesn't care what it pushes. It just pushes.
Okay, so what did you think to that? I hope that played okay. Does anyone resonate? Yeah, an ouch there. So it's in someone's shadows there. So yeah, it can be in someone's shadows. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've got some friends who's got pushers in their shadows, and it's quite interesting hearing the dialogue that they feel like they should be more motivated and to be more career driven. And you know, I can hear that inner critic going should, almost like that's more worthy as being a primary self than some other primary selves that maybe are a bit more laid back and you know, really appreciate the family. Yeah, the should word. And you know, just that part of the end that Hal said, that you know, it doesn't matter what the pusher pushes, it just wants to push. And it's the same with all of these, like with the perfectionist. It's about everything being perfect, not just about one thing, but perfection everywhere. Or if there's a part of us that likes to be in control, which is quite another primary self, that kind of always sits behind the eyes and just scans the environment to make sure everything's in its place, everything's on point, everything's okay. You know, that real fear of things crumbling, that it doesn't matter what it needs to control, it just everything, when the controlling part is in the driving seat, needs to be control everywhere. It's like the same with the pleaser. Open up the PowerPoint again. Okay, so there's an opportunity now for you to explore your own primary self system. So I can see through the chat that you're thinking about this already and you're aware of what some of those are. This is a few questions here that will just support you, just to see if you can uncover some more. So the first question is, if you were to describe yourself to a new employer, what 5 qualities would you say you have? List 3 things others would describe you as being. And what labels did you take on as a child in your family system? So this is really interesting because there's this question of, do we develop these parts in relation to the labels that are given to us? You know, like, oh, they're the warrior, they're the shy one, they're the creative, they're the clever one. they're the rude one, things like that. So, do we develop these parts because of these labels, or are there gaps within the family system? So we take on parts to fill those gaps. So, for example, if everyone's quite intellectual in the family, then there'd be a gap for somebody to be a bit more maybe rebellious and creative and into the arts potentially. So does somebody then take up that gap? So that's just a thought. I'll leave you with this for 5 minutes to complete this exercise. Okay, so just finishing off. So there will be an opportunity to go into breakout rooms in a moment to have a think about these ideas, and you can share your parts that you're uncovering with some peers. And I appreciate that some of you are in offices and you might not be able to do that. So if that's the case, you can stay in the main room. But I do think particularly with this pathwork theory, it's really useful to hear other people's experiences, and it gives us ideas and insights for ourselves as well. We're going to talk firstly about the inner critic, because the inner critic has a very important job to do. The inner critic usually gets quite a bad rap in counselling, and in general, not just in counselling, actually in general, it gets a really, really bad rap. Because of the destruction that it causes, it can really shave away at somebody's self-esteem, create really low moods, stop somebody from reaching their goals in life and living the kind of life they want. It can impact all areas of a person's well-being, their physical well-being, personal, social, their relationships, just on many different levels. And the inner critic can really, really dig its heels in. So the inner critic is the part of us that turns in towards the self and attacks the self, or it can feel like attacking the self. But actually, when we really get to know the inner critic, it develops to protect the self. So its job comes in to protect the self. It keeps the primary selves in check. So if you imagine a very early age, the pleaser comes into being. And as the pleaser comes into being, there's a energy that's disowned, and that energy might be anger, for example, that goes into the shadows. So at that time, the inner critic is developed to make sure that the pleaser keeps pleasing, but it also makes sure that the angry part doesn't come in as well. So if we're starting to feel angry, the inner critic will say things like, oh, you're not an angry person. Oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, you shouldn't be angry with so-and-so. So the inner critic will turn against that anger and will criticize it into submission, so it goes back into the shadows. And if the people pleaser just takes its foot off the pedal a bit and just starts to maybe do some things to please themselves and meet their own needs, the inner critic will say things like, oh, you're being selfish now, and all there's other things that you need to be doing. You've got to look after so-and-so, or whatever it might say, whatever the dialogue is. So the inner critic comes in to keep the pleasing, and it's equal and opposite energy in the shadows, firmly in the shadows. So the inner critic, in a sense, works tirelessly to do its job. It's working tirelessly all the time to keep our primary self system driving our psychological cars, because the inner critic thinks that that's the best thing to do, because these primary cells came in originally to protect our vulnerability. The critic is terrified that if it backs away, then we'll be exposed, we'll be vulnerable, and things might fall apart. So the inner critic really wants the primary self system to keep doing what it's doing. And one of the best things that we can do is just to really acknowledge the inner critic for what it does, and to really find what that gift is that he has for us. Because when we can start to show a bit more compassion to the inner critic, it actually starts to soften back a little bit. It can feel counterintuitive, but when we listen to a part, then they don't need to keep shouting anymore. You know, one of the fundamental needs of a human being is to be listened to and understood, and able to really, for that person to really express themselves. So when these parts are seen, they don't need to keep hammering on the door. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the breakout rooms to give you an opportunity to chew these ideas over with your peers. Now, if you can't be in a breakout room for whatever reason, just leave the room immediately, and that'll bring you back to the main space. And I'll just keep a check on the rooms to make sure that there's enough people in each room for you to actually have a conversation. So if you find yourself moving to another room, I would have just put you somewhere where you will have somebody to talk to. But if you can be in a room and put your camera on and have a conversation with your peers, then that, I think it will really, really support your time in the workshop. And it won't be recorded either. breakout rooms aren't recorded. So we'll have 10 minutes in breakout rooms.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so we've looked at the role of the inner critic. What I was just saying to the group that we're behind in the main space is how it's going to be really, really useful to consider how we know when these different parts are driving our psychological car. What does it feel like in the body? So we had responses like, you know, feeling really stressed and overwhelmed, and you know, it can feel quite dominant in a way. We might notice it by the back going tense, or the shoulders going tense, or maybe there's butterflies in the belly. So how do you know when one of these parts are really, really in play? How do you know when it's really occupying your body? Whereabouts does it live in your body? So that awareness will really, really support you to know, because it's through the body that we can identify these parts, and then we can choose to do something different about that. So if, for example, find ourselves getting really, really stressed and we're gritting our teeth, you know, usually the pusher, tension in the shoulders, when we can feel that in the body, that's a good opportunity to go, right, what am I neglecting in myself now? What's going on? I can see the pusher is really at play here. What part would be really useful to bring out of the shadows? And that might be the part that can meet your needs, or whatever it is you want to do. And it's almost like when these parts are really, really dominant in our lives, it's as if we're meeting life with just one slice of the pie. So rather than us being whole, we just meet life with a real fragment of ourselves. So when we can start to access some of these other parts, and particularly these disowned parts, then we can make ourselves whole again. It's a holistic way of working. So we're moving on to look at the disowned selves now. So Kolya says to confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. So disowned selves, these are the equal opposite energies of the primary selves. So as dominant and as big as your primary self is, will be as dominant and as big as your disowned self, but in the shadows. And what we resist persists. So if we try and resist parts of us coming out of the shadows, it can cause us problems. So when we identify the quality, its opposite is sent into the shadows. An unconscious process. We don't know that this is happening. It's an unconscious process. I think somebody might be on mute. I'm just going to. What usually happens is we think this part then disappears. We think if I just put my anger into the shadows, it won't belong to me. I won't be angry. We might hear people saying, oh, but I'm just not an angry person. That's not me. We really, really believe that it isn't us, that it isn't part of our personality. But actually, these parts remain alive within us, and they're in the shadows. And when we don't turn our attention to them, they can cause us problems. And they might show themselves. So they might show themselves under stress. So when we've got lots of stress piling on us, these parts might really squirt out. So they might be, like, say, the angry part might snap at someone, or the part that just wants to spend time alone might really, really withdraw from people. They tend to just come out in these situations, and then the inner critic will come in and start criticizing us for those parts coming out. Alcohol, so having a few drinks brings out the disowned self. Conflict as well, any kind of conflict brings out. And when we hear ourselves saying, oh, that, I don't know what came over me, that really wasn't me, I don't know why I'd be acted like that, or it's only when I'm a bit tipsy that I can really let my guard down, I can be really laid back, I can be fun. So these elements is what brings out the disowned self. And what Carl Jung says that the shadow has a gift. So each of these disowned parts of us had a gift. And there's hundreds of these parts. You know, the Stones say that there's over 400 parts that reside within us. But they went on to say that we've got this infinite way of being in the world. So this is like an ongoing journey. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow, says Carl Jung. So the more we try and push our primary selves forward in the world, the darker and denser the shadow becomes. And the idea with this work is that we don't just walk forward in life with our primary selves. We put our arms around all of ourselves. So those disowned selves, selves we don't like, selves we'd much rather push away, selves that are unfamiliar to us. We put our arms and extend them around all of ourselves. When we don't see one of these disowned selves as belonging to us, this is when the defense mechanism of projection comes in. And projection means we just see that part in another person, and it's projected a little bit like a cinema screen, where the kernel of that lays within the film reels or MP4 digital as it is now, but then it's shined on that big cinema screen. So what that means is when we're projecting out, we might only see the person in front of us as being angry or sad or whatever it is. We might find ourselves saying, oh God, they're always so angry, or that always seems so sad and down and depressed. You know, we put these all or nothings onto them because that's all we see in that person, which then is a bit of a sad thing because we don't then see that person for all of who they are, all of their traits. We just see it through this very tunnel visioned version. And that's our projection. And we project parts of ourselves that we don't like and that we repress onto others. So we judge other people as if they've got that and we don't have that. And it's a way of preserving the self. It preserves that primary self system. So it's quite a sophisticated mechanism, but it stops us from being whole and it prevents us from having intimate relationships with others and just accepting others for who they are. So we've got another exercise now, your disowned self. So we're going to go on a little journey now to find out a bit more about your disowned selves. And this is a useful way of doing it. So first of all, we can think of the disowned self system as being light and dark. So we put aspects into the dark that actually might be quite what we might class as being quite positive or useful aspects. Like we might put our compassion into the shadows, or our empathy, or our creativity, or our warmth, or our capacity for love. You know, we might put these really wholesome type parts of us into the shadows. It's not just what we might think is quite negative. So first of all, think of someone you admire. What is it about them that you admire? List 3 or more traits. Number 2, what traits in others do you dislike and tend to judge? Number 3, what would be 3 things that would be the worst thing to be accused of being like? And that will get you straight into your shadow. So take 5 minutes to do this. Please, just another minute to finish off. Okay, so this is a good time just to go up and open up the chat. So you can hover your mouse at the top of the screen. And if you've got any questions on this, because this often initiates questions, this disowned self, so do pop any questions in. And just looking up in the chat, so thank you for sharing that, Paula. And it's so interesting how these can just be so strong in our lives. You know, we've become so good at being certain ways, of you like calm and collective in situations, and then these other energies don't get a look in so much. Yeah, it's a bit trickier, isn't it, these ones? Dislike traits echo the worst things I could be used to being. Okay, so we've got not liking liars. Okay, so let's go through this. What did you put for number one? So anyone like to share things that you admire about others? And what is it you admire about them? What are those traits? Kindness, honesty, competency, humanity, sensitivity, or loads, fun, self-assured, speak up for self. Okay, so when we've got these lists, first of all, what we can do is to check through ourselves, and is there anywhere where we are like that? So for example, we've got confidence has come a few times. Is there any areas of your life where you are confident? So are you almost turning a blind eye to some of these parts of you? So that can be a really good one to look at first, to look for evidence of where you are that. And if it's really, really tricky to find, then this is an area for you to develop. So this is the gift here, and an opportunity for you to develop this part of you. And that person in your life is showing you how to do it. So they're holding a mirror up to a part of your unconscious and showing you how to do that. So it's there accessible for you. Just might mean a bit of practice. So number two, what traits in others do you dislike and tend to judge? So I saw some being put in the chat a bit earlier, like dishonesty, people who lie, judgmental, racist, poor manager, leadership, rudeness, aggression, selfishness, yeah, miserable, grumpy, interruptive, greed, Brilliant. Unreliable, bad listeners. Excellent. Competitive. Okay, so the challenge then is with these are, can you see any of these traits in yourself? Have there been times where you might have been acted this way? Times in the past, or maybe in the present? You know, in those nearest relationships, sometimes bring these parts out. So are there parts that you can own yourself? And also what can be really useful for this is to see these parts as an energy. So rather than a word that might carry judgment, but as an energy. So if we think of maybe like aggression as an energy, that's a real energy that can really help us to fight if we needed to. So when we have pushed energies like anger and aggression into our shadows, it means that we've often got quite maybe weaker boundaries, or if we needed to really defend ourselves, we wouldn't have that energy accessible to us. So for example, if we was walking down the street by ourselves at night and people were walking up towards us and seemed a bit edgy, we might need to fight our way out of trouble. You know, we might need to call upon that energy. So it's not like being aggressive all the time. You know, this theory isn't about saying you need to be more aggressive and you need to be more aggressive like that person who might have sprung to your mind. You know, it's not about saying that. It's about being able to access the energy when you need it. Also, it's about acknowledging that these parts lay within us as well. So areas where we might be judging around discrimination, so racism, for example, that we can acknowledge that we all have unconscious biases within us. And when we can really acknowledge our unconscious bias and explore that, and then first of all, it's less likely to spurt out the side unconsciously, but it helps us then to have more accepting and compassionate conversations with other people, and it then takes a spotlight from the person over there that we're judging, and we can bring it back onto ourselves and to own all of who we are. So it does take a bit more of a challenge to do this. Also, there's other traits that, so for example, I know somebody put liar in there, so again that might be one that we could really sort of challenge and ask, you know, do you ever lie? And if you're somebody that just doesn't, you know, maybe you're just like 100% open and honest with everyone, do you ever lie to yourself? And asking that question, do you ever treat yourself in that way, often brings up the answer. So it's not about lying to others and being dishonest and misleading others. Maybe there's a very subtle form of that you might do without actually realising it. But if you don't, maybe towards yourself, to take a look at how you are with yourself and to see whether that throws any insight onto it. Then that final question, what would be the 3 things that would be the worst things to be accused of? So yeah, this just gets straight down into it. Another one that often comes up is somebody that steals. And I find that quite interesting because yes, whilst we might not go to the shops and steal things, are there any other areas of life we might find ourselves stealing things? You know, have you ever stolen somebody's time? Have you ever really taken somebody's time away from them? Or maybe stole some of somebody's self-esteem? There's other more subtle ways that we do these things. And I think what's really interesting when we're working with its own self, because there's usually quite a lot of heavy defense armory really protecting us from those, we just want to project it out. We want to say, no, that doesn't belong to me. No, it doesn't. And if we can just pause and just consider it and be reflective and go, oh, actually, and it might come with a bit of cringing and a bit of, oh, but then we can take it back. And when we take this own part back, we're less likely to act it out. If we can really own it and say, actually, yeah, that's in me, we're less likely to act it out unconsciously. So would anyone like to share any insights that they've gained from that, or maybe any questions have come out of that? Yeah, so that's a really, really good example of where maybe your fight and anger has possibly gone into the shadows, and that might resonate with you or not, but yeah, let me know if it does. And so reclaiming a bit of that power, that power, you know, anger and power, that they're all sort of part of the same melting pot, that when you can bring that out of the shadows, then that can be really useful. What it can be useful to do is think about some of these disowned parts that you want to bring out. What would the body language be? How would these disowned parts occupy your body? So for example, that inner power that could be useful to bring out into the light might have that power stance, that strong stance that's a bit superhero like, and it could be useful just to bring that strong stance in a bit more to your life and just allow that inner power to come out. So inner critic won't allow you to be lazy at work. Oh, I've been neglecting my own jogging, so I guess there's more. Oops. Yeah, more than one type of lazy. So it sounds like there's quite a big pusher that keeps you going, and then just really neglecting yourself and what might be useful for you. Yeah, so I think that's another really good example of how we might then find ourselves having a bit of a moan and complain rather than really taking that inner power out of the shadows and into their life. But it means doing things differently. You know, it comes with a bit of a risk, and sometimes our inner critic will up the ante a bit. If we bring a disowned self out, the inner critic will want to bat it back down again. It's a little bit like those, I called it fairgrounds, you know, those little heads that come out that you hit with a mallet, and the inner critic will just want to pop that down. So it takes a bit of practice and a bit of repetition. Yeah, so people do project onto us, and sometimes people's projections onto us is what embeds a part. So if somebody projects on that we are a victim, or we are quite sad a lot of the time, or shy, or just trying to think of some other ideas, it can then become a part. We can sort of unconsciously take it on. Lots of messages coming through. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for your sharing there. I really like this, The Guest House by Rumi. This sort of says it all to me about accepting and welcoming in all these different parts, which is really the essence of this theory. So he says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And we're going to end with this clip from Inside Out. So it's a film that came out quite a few years ago now, all about parts. So we'll just finish with this.
So, as it turns out, the green trash can is not recycling. It's for greens, like compost and eggshells. And the blue one is recycling. And the black one.
Riley is acting so weird. Why is she acting so weird?
What do you expect? All the islands are down.
Joy would know what to do.
That's it. Until she gets back, we just do what Joy would do.
Great idea. Anger, fear, disgust. How are we supposed to be happy?
Hey, Riley, I've got good news. I found a junior hockey league right here in San Francisco, and get this, tryouts are tomorrow after school. What luck, right?
Hockey.
Uh-oh, what do we do?
Guys, here, you pretend to be Joy.
Won't it be great to be back out on the ice?
Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic.
What was that? That wasn't anything like Joy.
Because I'm not Joy?
Yeah, no kidding.
Did you guys pick up on that?
Sure did.
Something's wrong.
Should we ask her?
Let's probe, but keep it subtle so she doesn't notice.
So, how was the first day of school?
She's probing us.
I'm done. You pretend to be Joy.
What? Okay,
It was fine, I guess. I don't know. Oh, very smooth. That was just like Joy.
Something is definitely going on. She's never acted like this before. What should we do? We're gonna find out what's happening, but we'll need support. Signal the husband.
Ahem.
Uh-oh, she's looking at us. What did she say?
What? Oh, sorry, sir. No one was listening.
Is it garbage night? We left the toilet seat up. What? What is it, woman? What?
He's making that stupid face again.
I could strangle him right now. Signal him again.
Ah, so, Riley, how was school?
You gotta be kidding me. For this, we gave up that Brazilian helicopter pilot?
Move! I'll be Joy.
School was great, all right?
Riley, is everything okay?
Sir, she just rolled her eyes at us.
What is her deal? All right, make a show of force. I don't want to have to put the foot down.
No, not the foot.
Riley, I do not like this new attitude.
Oh, I'll show you attitude. No. Stay happy!
What is your problem? Just leave me alone.
Sir, reporting high levels of sass.
Take it to DEFCON 2.
You heard that, gentlemen? DEFCON 2.
Listen, young lady, I don't know where this disrespectful attitude came from.
You want a piece of this, Pops? Come and get it!
Yeah, well...
Here it comes. Prepare the foot.
Keys to safety position. Ready to launch on your command, sir.
Just shut up!
Fire!
That's it. Go to your room. Now.
The foot is down. The foot is down.
Good job, gentlemen. That could have been a disaster.
Well, that was a disaster.
I think that's a really good place to end. So we've got some time for some questions. I've just seen one here about projecting, and could I explain a little bit more about this? So yes, I can do that. So projecting is a defense mechanism that, so Sigmund Freud talked about defense mechanism. So it lives deeply within the unconscious, so we're not aware that we're doing with it. And essentially, when there's parts of us that might carry some shame, that might have been pushed into the shadows, probably for a very good reason, we then don't like those parts usually. So if, for example, in a family system, it wasn't okay to be like a show off, or to be angry, or whatever else, then we push those down into the shadows. They become disowned. So, and in order to protect ourselves and to protect our psyche, when we see other people behaving in those ways, maybe somebody really showing off or being really angry or whatever, we then judge that. And it's because we don't see it in ourselves, we judge it in other people. And because we don't like it in ourselves, we then don't like it when we see it in others. So it's like that person is holding a mirror up, in a way, to parts of our own psyche. Hope that helped. Okay, so no problem to all of those that have just said thank you in the clip. You're more than welcome, and I will be getting the slides sent over to you as well. Okay, so feel free as you leave the workshop today, do unmute yourselves, and if you want to say goodbye, you're more than welcome to. I shall stop the recording.